Hello and welcome to this week's episode of The Art and Design of Sci-Fi and Fantasy, Mystery and Horror. Today I speak with Professor Sam Gill, who's written a book on religion and technology. The focus of it is artificial beings, especially female artificial beings, and how the thinking has changed over time, or the thinking over time from ancient thought to a modern philosophy to a current pop culture entertainment as far as artificial beings, especially female artificial beings. And we talk about religion, body movement, different aspects of artificial intelligence. Spoiler alert, we do mention something about the ending of the first season of Westworld and also the ending of the movie Ex Machina. So if you haven't seen those, they're slight spoilers for you. So when we start talking about those things, you might want to skip ahead a few minutes if you don't want to get the spoiler. But it's minor stuff, I think. Anyway, very interesting discussion, and I hope you enjoy. Thanks. I'm speaking with Professor Sam Gill, author of Religion and Technology into the Future, From Adam to Tomorrow's Eve. Thank you for speaking with me.
I'm happy to be here.
So tell me how you got into studying science and science fiction thought and writing about it.
I have been long interested in religion. That's been my field of study. Mm-hmm. For quite a number of decades. But my first profession was actually in business, and beyond that I had degrees in science and math. So late in my career, then all of these things sort of came together with an obsession of watching science fiction on television and reading science work and reading about biology, and it all came together then. Almost by accident. I wanted to teach a course that was an intro to religion, and I chose these themes of science and religion that I thought students would be very excited about because I could deal with it in terms of a lot of contemporary fiction and television and things that they would know about.
Mm-hmm. All right, so tell me about this book.
Well, this book is a set of 25 essays. Mm-hmm. They interweave with one another pretty nicely. But the thing I was really interested in was looking at contemporary issues that focus around things like robots and androids and the almost obsession, it seems to me, with both science and fiction with creating sentient beings, mm-hmm. And to see if that was something new to the contemporary period or whether there were historical precedent for it. Mm-hmm. And then I was interested in saying, so given that, where is this going in the future? Because it could be really scary or it could be really exciting. Mm-hmm. So I put all that together, and this book came out of that. Yeah,
so I just received a copy of the book, and I noticed that your sources range from, I guess, ancient Greek thought to sort of Renaissance and modern philosophy, and then you get into as you say, contemporary shows. You know, I saw references to WALL-E, Mad Max, Doctor Who, Star Trek. A wide range of Westworld is a big example. It seems you discuss a lot.
That's right. Yeah, so the way I organized this, I really simply sat down and said, what are the sort of most exciting issues that there are today, and how are those illustrated by these either contemporary or really well-known classic works of fiction and art? So one of them, which is classic and it's really valuable at the present moment, it's very popular at the present moment, is Mary Shelley's remarkable novel Frankenstein, which just this year it celebrates its 200th anniversary of its first publication. So Frankenstein is another one of these examples, and I noticed that even the scientific community is pretty interested in this novel right now as well. So that just gives you sort of an example of the expanse of all this. It's been really fun.
So I was also fascinated with how you, again, I haven't read past the first chapter so far, but you mentioned, so it seems to really revolve around the creation of female artificial intelligence seems to be the main focus. And you talk about, you mentioned that you're going to discuss body, the human body, movement, singing, dancing, sort of the expression of religion. So that's fascinating.
Well,
can you elaborate on that?
Actually, that's another part of my research, is that I have been a dancer, ran a dance studio, and have been sort of obsessed with movement for the last 30 years or so. My last book was on religion and dance, so that does come in terms of like movement and the importance of all that. And to me, my sense of the future, the hopeful future, is to see religion and culture based increasingly on an embracing of our sort of fundamental human biology. And so what I wanted to do is to kind of trace that through all these examples, and sort of look at what is really distinctive about us human beings, and how are those distinctive features captured in all of these really cool examples. So to me, that's the compelling movement of the book. So,
would you say your book is sort of a review of the sort of historical, past and present historical approaches to this, or do you also use that to extrapolate what you think people will think or feel in the future, or
Okay, that's a really great question. It is framed in history, but it's definitely not any attempt at any sort of systematic historical accounting of these issues. So to me, the concerns of who are we, where are we going, what distinguishes us, are much more compelling than what people in the past have thought about that in some sort of systematic way. Then in terms of the future, I'm not projecting on any necessarily statistical or scientific trajectory, but rather using my own fairly wide reading in philosophy and biology as well as history to say, here's my point of view on all of this. Here's where I think things ought to be heading, and how my view differs from maybe the most common practices in, say, the scientific community. So I attempt to support it with a lot of scientific and philosophical work, but there's a lot of my own passion in this book. So so it's not just total opinion, that's for sure. So it's well researched, but it definitely has a slant that is my own construction. So it's creative in that respect. Okay.
Are there any other significant sort of secondary issues that you discuss in the book that we haven't brought up yet?
Well, one of them that I think is pretty cool, that might be interesting to your listeners or your audience, is that when I look at the future of the development of robots and artificial intelligence, there's a huge interest right now in creating sentient beings. And the principal techniques, both pretty much in science as well as in fiction, seem to me to be focused on really the brain as the model of who we are as human beings, and that if you can build a powerful enough artificial brain, then at some point there'll be this breakover or this singularity, and suddenly then you'll have this sentient being that then can sort of take over, and then we become pets of the AI robot. And my work, based more in biology, suggests that human beings really are who we are because of our biological basis and our basis in movement. So we don't gain concepts, for example, in my view, by learning them in school. We learn concepts, the most fundamental, important ones that pervade everything that we do, through our own gestures and movements that are culturally, historically, and personally based. So that what it seems to me that is necessary to create a sentient being is then basically to have a being that can move and that can have gestures and experience, you know. So that comes first, and then the brain, of course, supports all that. So that's kind of one of the more radical decisions that I developed throughout the book.
That's very interesting. Yeah, it's I look forward to.
Well, one of the examples there is what I call the ultimate Turing test. Your listeners probably know about the Turing test. That Alan Turing developed that in the mid-20th century. And that's that notion of can a computer fool a human being that it's really a human being? But that is that's a blind test, so that you have a person and a computer in two different rooms, and then you have the evaluator in the third room, and they all communicate with each other by language. But then you have this wonderful example of the film Ex Machina, where you have the AI android figure, and it's supposed to be a Turing test, but I call it the ultimate Turing test because you can see Ava, who is the robot, the AI robot, the android in that film, and you can see that she's definitely artificial because she's partly plastic and all that. You know, so it's like it screams out, "I'm artificial, I'm artificial, I'm artificial," but the evaluator, who's this kid named Caleb, he falls in love with her right away. You know, so to me, that's the ultimate Turing test, is to say, I'm artificial, but you will see me as a sentient being. So that's a really, really cool kind of notion. And to me, what makes one capable of passing the ultimate Turing test is the physicality of the being, the way they move. You know, so when you see, and actually also the voice qualities as well. So, so those are really cool kinds of things that I think about in the books.
Yeah, I look forward to reading about that.
Cool.
Yeah. So, tell me how you chose the entertainment choices that you made. You know, how do you choose the movies and shows that you use as examples?
Part of them are, for example, I just talked about Ex Machina. That one was one of the very first ones I got thinking about, and that's because the end of that movie disturbed me so deeply, because you become very attracted to this young woman who is not a sentient being. But then at the end of the film, as the film kind of nears the end, she commits these like brutal murders. And it's like, oh my gosh, how can this be, you know? And so to me it was like, this is really addressing something extremely deep in terms of what it means to be a human being, what it means to be a machine, how to move from one to the other. You know, all of these issues of value were raised in that film. And so basically I simply looked through things that I was familiar with, things that I really loved and enjoyed, and began to see that in many, many of them, these wonderful issues just came out. And then as I'd look at one, then I'd find others and so forth. So part of it was just complete the accident of, you know, what I like and what I know. And then part of it was based on, you know, where those things led me. So
yeah, I noticed you had data. You know, you have a discussion of data from Star Trek in there too. And
right, exactly. So that, you know, it's a wealth of material. I actually cut the number of chapters to get the book through book length, because you know, there's no ending to this. There's always a new thing that you'll find that can do the same thing. So.
Was there a part of the research or writing of the book that you found most enjoyable?
Actually, the whole thing just spilled out of me when it was sort of remarkable. I mean, this is like my 12th book or something like that, but when I sat down to do this, when I was really thinking about teaching this class, and I sat down one day, and I actually wrote a list of what I thought at the time would be lectures, and it turned out to be, well, I'd say probably 60 or 70% of that little list are the chapter titles in the book right now. And then, when I taught the course over 3 months, and I basically did all the research and the writing in those 3 months. It just, it was just, I couldn't sort of write fast enough to keep up with it. So, it just spilled out. So,
what did you find, or what did you sort of figure out or conjecture that was most surprising for you?
The most surprising thing to me is captured in the word in the subtitle, which is Tomorrow's Eve. Because what I was just, it was actually quite shocking when I began to realize that from the first android, which was in a 19th century novel, late 19th century French novel that actually has the title Tomorrow's Eve in English. It was translated in English. All the way through, to the first robot in a film, which was Fritz Lang's very classic silent film called Metropolis. It's really pretty widely known. All the way through to this Ex Machina and Scarlett Johansson's voice in Her, on and on and on. It was all these females who were these robots or sentient beings that are android robot styles. I mean, of course, there's some exceptions, like the Terminators and like Data and so forth. But even when I studied Mary Shelley's novel Frankenstein, I found that a lot of people feel like that the creature in that, though presented as male, is really aligned very strongly with Mary Shelley herself. And so it has a lot of female elements to it. So the thing that then began to stun me was, from Eve, from Galatea, from all these, they're made women, made by men, usually for the purposes of being a sidekick or a sexual partner or whatever, for men's pleasure. These artificial beings, and they're all made female, so that they're made as adults. They have no mother model. They do not have a mother themselves, and yet they turn out to be these remarkable figures in terms of what they offer, I think, to a future world. And what that is a much more complex understanding of the world. It's an understanding that allows for questions to arise that don't have answers. And I think that the sort of male model is to always come up with an answer, produce something, make it mean something.
Right.
But I think these female figures all raise the issues in such a way that you cannot stop thinking about them, because they're so fundamental to who we are, but then they don't supply easy answers. So to me, that was like such a stunning part of the book. So,
was there an issue that was particularly difficult for you to wrap your hands around and maybe come to a conclusion, or?
The one that I probably spent the most time thinking about and working and to try to really understand is the issue of violence. So that you see that definitely in Ava, the android in Ex Machina, but you also see it at the end of season 1 of Westworld, because there you have Dolores, who is this sort of very pleasant young woman who then basically kills her maker in that film. So it's there's just so much violence in that. And so to me it was like, what is going on that is behind all of this violence? And it confronted me personally in a way that was kind of interesting, because in terms of life and reality, I really abhor violence of almost every kind. But I'm attracted to so many television and movies and literature that has a lot of violence in it. So it's like, why am I attracted to violence in literature and art when I really abhor violence in reality? And so I started doing a lot of reading on the philosophy of violence, and I felt that they didn't do a very good job of thinking about violence in the context of what's clearly fiction. And I began to realize that very much like Westworld, you go to Westworld as a guest to commit all kinds of violence, knowing that it's not real violence, and all those guests then say, oh, that's where I learned my true self. So I began to think a lot about how violence plays this in fiction, not in reality, but in fiction, where it's clear that it is fiction. It plays this really important role of helping us address things that are really fundamental to who we are. And then I remembered Nietzsche's notion of, late 19th century notion of the death of God, and that humans murder God. And I began to realize that that the way for a made being, like all of these Tomorrow's Eve examples, because they're all made, to declare their free will, their independence, is the most absolute certain way of doing that is to kill their maker. And so we have then that parallel with those kind of theological themes in religion that was introduced by Nietzsche and others. So.
Interesting.
So that was, it took me a long time to really research that and come to a place where I felt pretty comfortable with what I was writing about.
Was there anything in your research that emotionally moved you, either positively or negatively?
I think all of it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's just like, it was very affirming to me to think of and to see example after example after example that I felt confirmed my great passion for how fundamental movement and dance and being a bodied person, being a bodied being is to who we are. So I had lived that and danced that and taught that for so long, but then writing this book, I think, simply gave me such a broader range of confirmation that that this is that there's something to this. We really are biological beings, and that is such a marvelous thing if we were just to embrace that and understand that.
Have you come across anyone else discussing that before?
I have. There's a small group of philosophers who do work pretty hard to embrace the biological constituency of being human. That we are fundamentally biological. There's one person in particular, Maxine Sheets Johnstone, who wrote a book called Primacy of Movement, which very heavily influenced me. And she simply, it's a very wonderful book, but in the most fundamental way, she just reminds us that we come to life as movement. It's not that we come to existence and then we learn how to move. It's when we move, then we know we're alive. And You know, like when a woman is pregnant, when the baby moves, then she's like, oh yeah, it's alive, you know. Mm-hmm. And a stillborn is the baby that's born without life. And so she then develops it in a broad and very full philosophical perspective. But she, as well as a number of other philosophers, although they're certainly in the minority in terms of philosophers, have developed this notion of the importance of movement and gesture as who we are. Mm-hmm.
But how about applying that to artificial beings? Is that something you...
No, I don't know anybody who does that. So I feel like that's something I've done that I have not seen anybody else do. So
yeah, I don't think I've come across that either. So I just want to check with you to make sure.
Right. Yeah, no, I think I would have run across it, but I have not for sure. So tentatively, I'll claim that as my contribution.
So, what do you hope the book will do? Do you think it might affect people working on artificial beings, or you know, what do you want it to affect?
Well, I think it would be. I think it would be very exciting if people who were developing artificial intelligence were to read this and then consider how that notion that body movement is pretty fundamental. And so are so many other things. I mean, just think of like when you create a I would call it an AI robot. AI to me means the intelligence part, and the robot means the physical part. But combined together, an AI robot. When you create that, I mean, robots are made of plastic and metal and silicon. So they don't move. I mean, they don't grow. They don't die. They aren't born. Any feelings and all those things they have are simulations of what human feelings is supposed to be. Mm-hmm. And so to me, it's like, well, unless you work on developing some way that matches that biological magic of when we move, we feel ourselves moving. Mm-hmm. When we move, we're growing, we're hurting, we're falling in love, we're doing all those things, you know. Mm-hmm. Then you'll never really come to a sentient being. It just can't happen that way. Or if you did, it would be. I think it's absolutely possible that you could create an artificial being that could imitate human behavior in a certain sphere that would be. It would not be distinguishable from human beings, but that to me is a long way from being a truly sentient being. So anyway, I'd love for scientists to look at it, but even more broadly than that, I just would love for the general educated reader to look at this book so that when they saw things like movies and television programs and literature and the great popularity of all of these scientific movements, that they would recognize that there is a great deal of depth that one can appreciate about what those things are saying about who we are as human beings.
As you were speaking, the scene from Blade Runner from the 80s, you know, with the scientist and all his toys, they seem to have more life because of the way they moved. You know, they seem to have individual movements that made them seem more real and sentient.
Yes. To me, it's, you know, when we say, you know, you move like a robot, then you're really saying you don't move naturally, you know. Mm-hmm. Now, I think that robots will eventually be able to move in such a way that they look natural, but they're always going to be, in my view, they're always going to be simulated movement that's based on tracking human movement, and so the movement is really the core element there.
Mm-hmm. Can you speak to any difficulties you had in finishing the book or getting it published, and how you overcame those?
Difficulties, well, I did have to send it to a number of presses because I think it fits across so many different categories that publishers had a hard time sort of figuring out, where does this fit?
Mm-hmm.
Does it fit in religion? Does it fit in technology? Does it fit in religion and science? Does it, fit in literature? Does it fit in media? So I think that the responses I got from several presses that I sent it to basically sort of reflected, that they just didn't know where to put it. So it took me a while then to find a publisher for it. So, but not that long, maybe 6 months or so.
Okay. So, what's your next writing project?
Well, actually, I have another book coming out in about a month or two, which is called Creative Encounters: Appreciating Difference. And this book really looks at the issue of how do we appreciate difference in the world. It seems to me to be a central concern. I want to move past just tolerating difference, which I think is maybe a sort of common strategies like, okay, how can we get along with other people?
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's tolerate them somehow,
Right.
But what I really feel is that difference is what is vitalizing to us. It's what is exciting. It's what makes us reflect and change and grow and create new things. So the book is really constructed around those themes of not just how we tolerate difference, but how we come to truly appreciate it. Part of this came out of my history of dancing, because my work on dance, which it's gone on for like 30 years now, has been the dancing and the study of dances across the world.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems to me that with very few exceptions, people always want to teach you their dances. If you go visit them, they're like, come on, we'll show you how to dance,
Mm-hmm.
and dances are often identified with, who you are.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you do country dancing, then, you're a cowboy or a cowgirl. So,
mm-hmm.
Or if you do, hip hop, then that puts you in that community. So, your identity is tied up with, the way you dance, the way you move, the way you do that to music and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
So that notion of when you're looking at dances of people that are not like you, then most of us can say, wow, that is so interesting. I love that. I'm so interested in seeing those differences. So you can appreciate difference in dancing really well.
Mm-hmm.
And what I really wanted to be able to do is to suggest ways in which we can appreciate difference through these creative encounters,
Mm-hmm.
Not only in dancing but elsewhere.
It actually brings to mind when you say that, people also have their, clothing also gives people an impression of what community you belong in. And then if you have someone in one type of outfit, say, and they move or dance in a different way, it creates a dissonance, I think, that, either leads to humor or shock or something.
Oh, yes. I have so many stories about that. When I was in Bali one time, it was actually walking. It wasn't for dancing. But I was walking with a bunch of young Balinese guys. And I've been to Bali a few times, and there's a Balinese walk, When you see somebody walk, it's like, oh, wow, they know how to walk. And it's the Balinese walk. And so we were walking down the road, and I was trying to imitate their walk.
Mm-hmm.
And they looked over at me, and they all stopped, and they watched me, and And then they all just busted out laughing. You know, they said, "We know what you're doing. You're trying to walk like a Polynesian. You can't do it."
Mm-hmm.
It's like, yeah, that is so absolutely true. You know, it is. You can pretend, but you really can't do it. So
yeah,
lots of those stories.
yeah. So, do you have a website or social media presence that people can follow your thoughts or writings?
I do. sam-gill.com.
Mm-hmm. So that's
there's a lot of stuff there that there's a course on religion and dance that I teach. It's got lectures and videos, and they're printed as well as in video form. Mm-hmm. So that's all there. Most of my publications are accessible through that because I've published lots and lots of periodical literature as well as books. Mm-hmm. And some blog posts are there. Quite a variety of things are there.
And that's SAM.
SAM dash, which is a hyphen,
mm-hmm.
Gill, GILL, .com.
Okay, all right.
Very simple.
So that's all I have. Do you have any final thoughts?
Okay, well, no, I really appreciate you calling me. I just got the physical book a couple days ago, probably the same day you did, so,
mm-hmm.
so it was kind of fun to see it, and of course it's fun to talk about it a little bit as well, and I definitely hope that people will take a look at it.
Oh yeah, it has a very conversational tone. It's easy to read, though it has pretty substantial intellectual content.
Right.
But
well, I worked really hard to make it accessible to a non-specialist reader because I just really wanted a broader appeal than a bunch of specialist academics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like I said, I'm looking forward to continuing to read it. So,
all right. Let me know what you think about it.
Sure. All right. Well, thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening. One of the best ways in which you can provide feedback for this podcast is to rate me on iTunes. Please give me a good rating if you like this, or feel free to give me a bad rating if you didn't, and I'll use that feedback to hopefully make this a better podcast. You can also follow me on Instagram under Chris Alvarez Sci-Fi, on Facebook under Chris Alvarez WLC, on YouTube under Chris Alvarez WLC, and on Twitter under Chris Alvarez WLC. You can also get more information on my website, chrisalvarez.com. Please remember my name Chris does not have an H, so it's ChrisAlvarez.com. Thanks for listening, and keep imagining the future.